organizers for inviting me here. I normally hang out with tax people, and they're nerdier than you guys, so I appreciate the chance to sort of upgrade my usual audience. And by the way, I should say Happy Australia Day. I noticed some Aussies here. What I want to do is sort of odd, because I'm actually a big fan of 95% of what Brady and Ryan are trying to do. The Better Wage Plan, compared to the current system, is enormously better in terms of competitiveness, in terms of growth, job creation, incomes for our ordinary workers. It's a really good plan. But sometimes there is more than one way to get to a really good destination. And Gordon, I actually pretty much agree with almost everything he said, because what the House has done is they decided, let's get rid of the corporate income tax as we know it, and replace it with something that is sort of like a consumption-based tax system. But as you heard Gordon say, there's more than one way to skin that cat. You can do a destination-based system, or you can do an origin-based system. I'm a Hall-Rabushka, flat tax, origin-based system, have been for a long time. And one of the reasons, when you make that choice, are we going to go to a consumption tax, and then you're deciding origin or destination, one of the reasons I'm a big fan of origin-based taxation is because I'm a giant fan of tax competition. What is tax competition? That's when governments have to sort of look over their shoulders and decide we better not raise taxes even higher because we'll lose jobs and investment and business to other countries. Tax competition is a wonderful thing if you follow the Leviathan model of political behavior, which, if you have any realism in your assessment of political behavior, is very accurate compared to the Angels model of political behavior. And what has tax competition given us? You go back to, say, 1980, before globalization and tax competition really took hold. The average top personal tax rate in OECD countries was 67 to 68%. The average corporate rate was 48%. Now the average personal rate is down in the low 40s, and the average corporate rate is down to 24. Did all those positive things happen because governments around the world were reading Cato Institute policy papers? I mean, I tell my boss that when it's salary review time, but I know it's not because of anything I've written. It's because of tax competition. The Reagan and Thatcher tax cuts on the personal side, what Ireland and Switzerland and others have done on the corporate side. We have seen much, much better tax policy, not because politicians want to do it, but because they were forced to do it by globalization and tax competition. And that is something that you get with an origin-based system. What about a destination-based system? Probably the most damning thing that anyone's ever written about the destination-based system actually came from a supporter. Alan Auerbach, in a paper for the Center for American Progress, which, by the way, it's a very left-wing group, so that should tell you something. In his paper for the Center for American Progress, the number one subheading he had in his paper, defending and extolling the virtues of a destination-based cash flow tax, he said it would end the race to the bottom. I love the race to the bottom. I love putting handcuffs on politicians. I want to make it harder for them to raise taxes. In effect, what the destination-based cash flow tax does is it says that the tax base is what is consumed in the United States, not what is earned or produced in the United States. And guess what? Consumption is a much less mobile tax base. And if you watched the forum that AEI held last month, and you had Devereaux and Michael Keane and all the academic experts who like this idea, at the end of the program, they were talking about how wonderful this would be because tax competition will come to an end, that no government will ever again face pressure to lower their tax rates. I think that's a horrible outcome. Now, in theory, again, there's nothing necessarily wrong with a destination-based system until you introduce political behavior and political incentives into the structure. Let me say something also about a value-added tax. First, I want to dispel the notion that a value-added tax gives other countries an advantage on trade. If an American company is selling a product in Germany, it pays the VAT. If a German company is selling a product in Germany, it pays the VAT. If an American company is selling a product in America, it pays no VAT. If a German company is selling a product in America, it pays no VAT. There's a level playing field. The only difference between America and Germany is the German government siphons away more money from the private sector to finance a bigger welfare state. I don't think it's a good idea to do anything that might run the risk that we'll get a VAT. And why am I worried about the destination-based cash flow tax? Because there's only one tiny difference between that plan and a subtraction method back, and that's whether or not wages are non-deductible. And this will get into, of course, what we'll hear later in the panel, which is, well, what if the WTO looks at this idea and says it's not really compliant because it's a direct tax, even though it's a consumption base, it's collected on a direct basis. So nobody really knows whether or not it'll be compliant with the WTO. Ruben Abiyona, University of Michigan, has a very persuasive paper that it wouldn't be. I don't normally agree with Ruben about issues since he's a big tax harmonization, anti-tax competition guy, but who knows what's going to happen. But my concern is, especially, of course, if the WTO and the world community is upset about whatever Trump does over the next couple of years, what happens if we have a case with the WTO, and not only are they looking at the direct versus indirect language, but then they're saying, we're tired of Trump just unilaterally doing stuff around the world, let's rule against the U.S. Well, what's the easiest way for politicians in Washington to quote-unquote fix our plan? I mean, for those of you who remember FISC and DISC and all that kind of stuff, well, the easiest way is just to make wages non-deductible, then presto, we have a value-added tax. And for any of us who think, and maybe it's not a lot of people in this room, I have no idea, but if you think that maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't be a good idea for the United States to become more like France and Italy and Greece, the idea of giving a giant new tax revenue source to the crowd just down the street there a little bit would be a terrible idea. And so I viewed sort of the no VAT position as just a necessary barricade if we're going to have any hope of controlling the size and growth of government spending. Which, by the way, gives me an opportunity to say something helpful that hopefully might bring us together, Gordon. There's no question, I think, that Brady and Ryan, in their effort to do a very, very good thing, they looked at the DBCFT as a financing mechanism. That 1.2, the reason it's a backbone is not because the structure of the plan or the growth of the plan comes from the destination-based system. It's the fact that it's a big, giant pile of revenue. And in Washington, of course, well, gosh, how can we finance a tax cut when we're also trying to balance the budget? Let me give you a couple of numbers from the Congressional Budget Office Economic and Budget Outlook update that came, not update, the actual outlook that came out just 2 days ago. If we simply, starting next fiscal year, allow government to grow 2.63% a year, we balance the budget in 10 years. No tax increases at all. 2.63% annual growth of spending, we balance the budget in 10 years. Is that difficult? Well, we had an actual spending freeze from 2009 to 2014, 0% growth. So 2.63% growth, faster than inflation, that doesn't sound too unreasonable to me. So why should we even be considering tax increases? But you're saying, but hold on. We're talking a tax cut, especially if you take out that revenue plug of the $1.2 trillion. So I did calculations just this morning. And I said, what if we had a $3 trillion tax cut? What would that mean? In other words, what if we got rid of the border adjustability provision and manufacturers had a bigger tax cut all around? Tax Foundation says that the Better Way plan on a dynamic basis is actually a revenue gainer. So a $3 trillion tax cut, we have a lot of money to play with. We can easily get rid of that plan. But what would it require if we still want to balance the budget over 10 years? Would we have to cut the federal government by 20%, by 30%? What sort of draconian, savage austerity would be necessary? You know what would be necessary? For government to grow over the next 10 years by an average of 1.96% a year.
Sounds like a good plan.
Sounds like a good plan to me, too. So in my mind, why take all the risks of maybe creating a VAT? Why take the risk of an adverse decision at the WTO? Why undermine tax competition, which is the best friend that the business community and taxpayers have? Why do all that when just a tiny little bit of additional spending restraint can easily balance the budget and give us a huge tax cut? Now, admittedly, if Washington wants to do some big boondoggle infrastructure plan, that makes it harder. If Washington doesn't want to reform entitlements, that makes it harder. If Washington doesn't want to trim discretionary spending, that makes it harder. So I realize that I'm giving what I would consider actually a very watered-down libertarian agenda but an agenda that I don't think is unreasonable to the American people, the American business community, the American taxpayer. And so, yes, the Better Way plan is a great plan, but I'd rather get there with a slightly different route.